What's up guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's Tesh. I hope you guys are doing well. Today's video is going to be about the history behind the British line of succession. The British line of succession has a rich and complex history spanning over 1,000 years, shaped by monarchies, conquests and political intrigues. The line of succession and the descent of the royal house would seem simple enough, right? The eldest child of the king inherits the throne, but it's not quite that straightforward, or at least it has never always been that way because of multiple marriages, illegitimate children, and wars. This in turn has caused the line of succession headaches, and often battles have broken out because of the various rules. Though while problems have arisen, there are standard guidelines for the succession to the throne. When looking at the complex history of the succession to the British throne, we must start with the Anglo-Saxon kings, where the line of succession was based on tribal leadership and family ties. We then follow the Norman conquest of 1066, where William the Conqueror established a hereditary monarchy, with the throne passing to his sons, and that tradition began to form the basis of the modern-day rules that govern the succession. Following the 20th century, the monarchy has since adapted to changing times, with the line of succession evolving to include female heirs and marriages to commoners. And of course to the present day, where the line continues to evolve with the monarch's descendants and their families holding the highest ranks. When looking at the line of succession and its history, female heirs have always been displaced by younger brothers. This was called male preference primogeniture. However, the practice of male preference primogeniture ended in 2015, following the enactment of the Succession to the Crown Act that Queen Elizabeth II amended. That legislation also avoided the provision that barred royals from ascending to the throne if he or she was married to a Roman Catholic. However, Catholics are still banned from becoming the British monarch. The basis of the line of succession was determined in the constitutional developments of the 17th century, which culminated in the Bill of Rights of 1689 and the Act of Settlement of 1701. Because when James II fled the country in 1688, Parliament held that he had abdicated the government and the throne was vacant, something that almost never happened. The line of succession as of today comprises of the Prince of Wales and his children, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, followed by Prince Louis, the Duke of Sussex, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. And it goes on essentially for every descendant since William the Conqueror. No official complete version of the line of succession is maintained other than the immediate line. The exact number, however, in more remote collateral lines of the people who would be eligible is uncertain. In 2001, American genealogist William Adams Rittweisner compiled a list of 4,973 living descendants of Electress Sophia of Hanover in order of succession without omitting Roman Catholics. When updated in 2011, the list included 5,753. The final person on both lists, number 4,973 and 5,753, was Karen Vogel, a therapist from Rostock, Germany. Now let's do a deep dive into the history from before the Union of Crowns to after. The line of succession prior to the modern era was governed by common law, rule of primogeniture, until the 14th century, when Parliament first began to legislate on the subject. However, this rule was not always followed. The sons of William the Conqueror each contested each other for the throne, and his granddaughter Matilda was passed over for his grandson King Stephen, even though Matilda's father had been king and she was next in line. And Stephen's claim was only that his mother had been William's daughter. However, all does get fixed, it just takes a couple of wars. After the death of Richard I in 1199, the throne should have gone to his nephew Arthur, the son of his next brother Geoffrey. But as Arthur was still an only child, Richard's younger brother John was able to take the throne for himself under the pretext that he was closer relative to the late king than Arthur was, who was one generation removed. King John then bolstered his claim to the throne by having his nephew secretly killed. King John is also the sovereign under which the Magna Carta was written. Following the death of King John came Richard II. He was then deposed by Henry IV in 1399. Henry was also in turn usurped by another relative with a better claim, Edmund, Earl of March. Richard and Henry were the grandsons of Edward III through his first and fourth sons, and Edmund was also a descendant from Edward III's son, and so placed ahead of Henry in the line of succession. But as Edmund was only 7 at the time and Henry's position would not have been secure with any lesser title than king, Henry took the throne for himself with the endorsement of Parliament. Decades later, the rival House of York, which was descended from Edmund's sister, Anne de Mortimer, seized the throne from Henry's grandson during the Wars of the Roses. In 1485, Henry Tudor, a female line descendant of a legitimate branch of the royal House of Lancaster, the House of Beaufort, assumed the English crown as Henry VII, after defeating and killing Richard III in battle. Richard had been the last king of the House of York and the last of the Plantagenet dynasty. Henry declared himself retroactively king from the 21st of August 1485, the day before his victory over Richard at the Battle of Bosworth. Following Henry coming to the throne, Sir William Blackstone called Henry's hereditary claim the most remote and unaccountable that was ever set up, and said that his subsequent marriage to Richard's sister Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV, was his best title to the crown. After Henry's coronation in London in October that year, his first parliament summoned to meet at Westminster in November and enacted that the inheritance of the crown should be, rest, remain, and abide in the most royal person of the then sovereign lord King Henry VII and the heirs of his body lawfully coming. Henry VII was followed by his son Henry VIII. Though his father descended from the Lancastrians, Henry VIII could also claim the throne through the Yorkist line, as his mother Elizabeth was the daughter of Edward IV. In 1542, Henry also assumed the title King of Ireland. This would pass down with monarchs of England and later Great Britain until the separate crowns merged in 1800. Henry VIII's multiple marriages led to several complications of the succession. Henry VIII was married first to Catherine of Aragon, by whom he had a daughter named Mary, and King Henry did not like that his only heir was a girl, so he annulled his marriage to Queen Catherine and married Anne Boleyn, which also resulted in the king having a daughter. She was named Elizabeth. After he beheaded Queen Anne and married his third wife, he then had a son, Edward, by Jane Seymour, his third wife, however, not his last wife. Because Henry had no other sons, the Succession to the Crown Act of 1533 declared Mary illegitimate. The Second Act in 1536 did the same for Elizabeth. The Third Act in 1543 did not legitimize the daughters, but did reinsert them into the line of succession after Edward, providing that further the king should and might give, will, limit, assign, appoint or dispose the said imperial crown and other premises by letters patent or last will in writing. Mary and Elizabeth under Henry VIII's will were to be followed by the granddaughters of the king's deceased sister, Mary Tudor, the Duchess of Suffolk. Still excluded were the Duchess's still living daughters, Frances Grey, the Duchess of Suffolk, and Eleanor Clifford, the Countess of Cumberland. This would also exclude from the succession the descendants of Henry's sister Margaret Tudor, who were the rulers of Scotland. Edward IV succeeded Henry VIII in 1547. The king had attempted to divert the course of succession in his will to prevent his Catholic half-sister Mary from inheriting the throne. He excluded both Mary and Elizabeth, settling on the Duchess of Suffolk's daughter, Lady Jane Grey. Jane was originally excluded on the premise that no woman could reign over England. Nonetheless, the will, which originally referred to Jane's heirs male, was amended to refer to Jane and her heirs male. Upon the Edward IV's death in 1553, Jane was proclaimed Queen of England and Ireland. She was not universally recognized though, and after 9 days she was overthrown by the more popular Lady Mary Tudor. As Henry VIII's will had been approved by the Succession to the Crown Act of 1543, Edward's contravening was ignored as unlawful. Mary was succeeded by her half-sister Elizabeth, who broke with the precedents of many of her predecessors and refused to name an heir. Whilst previous monarchs, including Henry VIII, had specifically granted the authority to settle uncertain successions in their wills. The Treasons Act of 1571 asserted that Parliament had the right to settle disputes and made it treason to deny parliamentary authority. Wary of threats from other possible heirs, Parliament further passed the Safety of the Queen Act 1584, which provided that any individual involved in attempts to murder the sovereign would be disqualified from succeeding to the throne. The Act was repealed in 1863. Moving on from England, we then go to the House of Stuart in Scotland and their line of succession that merges into the English line of succession around the Tudor period. The House of Stuart had ruled in Scotland since 1371, and it followed strict rules of primogeniture. Though we won't be able to go far back, we start in 1503 when King James IV married Margaret Tudor, a daughter of England's Henry VII, which 100 years later resulted in his great-grandson James VI inheriting the English crown as well. In 1543, Henry VIII had attempted to marry his son Edward to Mary Queen of Scots, daughter of James VI, which would have drawn the two kingdoms closer together. This marriage plan, outlined by the Treaty of Greenwich, was resisted by the Scots, who favoured the old alliance with France. Because of this rejection, a 9-year-long war began. This was known as the Rough Wooing. However, in July 1565, Mary Queen of Scots married Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, a grandson of Margaret Tudor, older sister to Henry VIII. However, Mary Queen of Scots was deposed in June 1567, and there was a civil war in Scotland until May 1573. Mary was forced to abdicate in favour of her son, James VI. For the rest of the 16th century, England's diplomatic relations with Scotland were characterised by a so-called amity. Elizabeth I did not publicly name Mary's son James VI as a successor, but gave him an annual cash subsidy. When Elizabeth I of England and Ireland was succeeded by James VI of Scotland, son of Mary Queen of Scots, this violated Henry VIII's will, under which Lady Anne Stanley, heiress of Mary Tudor, Duchess of Suffolk, was supposed to succeed. James quickly asserted that hereditary right was superior to statutory provision, and as King of Scotland was powerful enough to deter any rival. He reigned as James I of England and Ireland, thus affecting the union of the crowns, although England and Scotland remained separate sovereign states until 1707. His succession was rapidly ratified by Parliament. Following the reign of King James I and VI came the reign of King Charles I, James's eldest surviving son and successor. He would later be overthrown and beheaded in 1649, and the monarchy abolished and replaced by the Protectorate under Lord Oliver Cromwell, a de facto monarch with the title of Lord Protector rather than King. Cromwell had the right to name his successor, which he exercised on his deathbed by choosing his son, Richard Cromwell. Richard was ineffective and was quickly forced from office. Shortly afterwards, the monarchy was restored with Charles I's son, Charles II, as king. Following that hiccup came James II and VII, a Roman Catholic who succeeded his brother and Charles II, despite efforts in the late 1670s to exclude him in favour of Charles's illegitimate Protestant son, the Duke of Monmouth. James was later deposed when his Protestant opponents forced him to flee from England in 1688. Parliament then deemed James had, by fleeing the realms, abdicated the thrones and offered the crowns not to the king's infant son, James, but to his Protestant daughter, Mary, and to her husband, William, who, as James's nephew, was the first person to the succession not descended from him. The two became joint sovereigns as William III and II, and Mary II of England, Scotland, and Ireland. William had insisted on this unique provision as a condition of his military leadership against James. This transferring of power from James to William and Mary was called the Glorious Revolution. Following that, the English Bill of Rights and the Scottish Claim of Right Act both passed in 1689. This determined succession to the English, Scottish, and Irish thrones, first in line with the descendants of Mary II. Next came Mary's sister, Princess Anne, and her descendants. Finally, the descendants of William by any virtue of marriage were added to the line of succession. Only Protestants were allowed to succeed. Those who married Roman Catholics were excluded. After Queen Mary had died in 1694, her husband continued to reign alone until his death in 1702. The line of succession provided for by the Bill of Rights was almost at an end. William and Mary had no children, and Princess Anne's children had all died. Parliament passed the Act of Settlement of 1701. The Act maintained the provision of the Bill of Rights whereby William would be succeeded by Princess Anne and her descendants, and thereafter by his own descendants from future marriages. Interesting fact, Princess Anne was a princess by marriage to her husband, as at this point the daughters of a king were still styled as lady and not princess. Anyways, the Act of 1701 declared that they would be followed by James I and VI's granddaughter Sophia, the Electress of Hanover, and her heirs, as under the Bill of Rights, non-Protestants and those who married Roman Catholics were excluded. Because Sophia was a foreign citizen, Parliament passed the Sophia Naturalization Act of 1705 to make her and her descendants English and therefore eligible for the throne. Upon King William's death, Anne became Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Because the Parliament of England had settled on Sophia as Anne's heir presumptive without consulting Scottish leaders, the Estates of Scotland retaliated by passing the Scottish Act of Security. The Act provided that upon the death of Anne, the estates would meet to select an heir to the throne of Scotland who could not be the same person as the English sovereign, unless numerous political and economic conditions were met. Queen Anne originally withheld consent but was forced to grant it when the estates refused to pay taxes and sought to withdraw troops from the Queen's army. England's Parliament responded by passing the Alien Act of 1705, which threatened to cripple Scotland's economy by cutting off trade with them. Thus, Scotland had to unite with England to form the Kingdom of Great Britain in 1707. The crown of the new nation, along with the crown of Ireland, was subject to the rules laid down by the English Act of Settlement. Now we talk about the current line of succession directly descended from Anne, who was predeceased by Sophia, Electress of Hanover, and was therefore succeeded by Sophia's son, who became George I in 1714. This then created the House of Hanover in Britain. There were some attempts made to the risings of 1715 and 1745 to restore Stuart claims to the throne. They were supported by those who recognized the Jacobite succession. The House of Hanover nonetheless remained undeposed, and the crown descended in accordance with the appointed rules, and in 1801, following the Acts of Union 1800, the separate crowns of Great Britain and Ireland were merged and became the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The line of succession did have ups and downs after George I came to the throne. His son George II's son died, but before he died he had a son who became George III. George III in his later years had mental health problems, and his son became regent, creating the Regency Act, and after George III died, George IV succeeded him. However, his daughter died in childbirth and lost her child while giving birth. So because George IV had no legitimate children, the throne went to his younger brother, William IV, who also did not have any legitimate children. So upon his death in 1837, his 18-year-old niece, Alexandrina Victoria, who was the daughter of his younger brother, the Duke of Kent, succeeded to the throne as Queen Victoria, and after her very long 63-year reign, which was known as the Victorian era, she was succeeded in 1901 by her eldest son, Albert Edward, who became Edward VII. And upon his death in 1910, his second son acceded to the throne as George V. Edward's first son, Prince Albert Victor, died during an influenza pandemic in 1892. Following the reign of George V, which was impacted by the First World War, Edward the Prince of Wales became Edward VIII on the death of his father in January 1936. Edward opened Parliament in November, but he would soon abdicate in December 1936 and was never crowned. Edward had desired to marry Wallis Simpson, a divorcee, but the Church of England, of which the British sovereign is supreme governor, would not authorize the marriage of a divorcee. Consequently, Parliament passed the His Majesty's Declaration of Abdication Act 1936, by which Edward VIII ceased to be sovereign immediately upon his royal assent, as king being signified in Parliament on December 11th. The Act provided that he and his descendants, if any, were not to have any right, title, or interest in or to the succession to the throne. Edward died childless in 1972. Edward's abdication was a demise of the crown, and the Duke of York, his brother who was the next in line to the throne, immediately succeeded to the throne and to its rights, privileges, and dignities, taking the regnal name of George VI. He in turn was succeeded in 1952 by his eldest daughter Elizabeth II. By that time, the monarch of the United Kingdom no longer reigned in the greater part of Ireland, which had become a republic in 1949, but was the monarch of a number of independent sovereign states called the Commonwealth Realms. She was then succeeded by her son in 2022, the Prince of Wales, Charles III, who will be succeeded by the Prince William, the Prince of Wales, who will be succeeded by his son, Prince George of Wales. And that is it for today's video, guys. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please don't forget to drop a like, comment, and subscribe. Also check the links down below for my social medias if you guys want to take a look. I do run a Royal History channel account, and I hope you guys do enjoy that. Thank you so much for watching. I will be back with another video next time. See you guys later. Bye-bye.